What makes music sound like fire and lava? Unlike previous environments, I think the sizzle and sound is a little more decentralized and harder to pin down. And even still, fire-themed bangers in video games can take many forms. It could simply be the theme of a hot area like a volcano's caldera, a scorched, war-torn landscape, or Topeka. Or maybe something a bit more abstract, like a fire-themed character, maybe even a heated rivalry. It could be the fiery depths of hell, but I'll let those of you who say mean things about music theory tell me what hell sounds like when you visit yourselves. Before we talk about the fieriest video game music known to man, a word from today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by boot.dev. Have you ever tried getting into coding, but after hours of theory and jargon, you find yourself like, I think coding sucks? There is a better way to learn coding. Boot.dev offers many different courses in many different programming languages, helping you learn coding through fantasy RPG-themed lessons. With every lesson you complete, you're leveling up, earning achievements, completing quests, and fighting bosses, among many other familiar game mechanics. And it's not just a game, you're actually learning real-world back-end development skills and applications of industry-standard programming languages, such as Python and JavaScript. That being said, the courses are so fun. You may already know I've been taking courses on boot.dev for a few months now, and it's still an absolute blast. Even the concepts that take me a bit longer to wrap my head around are delivered in an approachable and intuitive way. Which, as I've said before, is the entire concept behind my own channel. So if you like these videos, hopefully you'll give boot.dev a try. Go to boot.dev and use promo code Cadence Hira to receive 25% off your entire first year on the annual plan. Link is in the description. So what are the categories of fire-level music in video games? Honestly, I have no idea. This really was the first environment where I wasn't immediately and confidently able to sort our music into the usual arbitrary and non-mutually exclusive categories. Which is kind of interesting in its own right. The environments that have a clearly identifiable sound, in my opinion, are the ones that are most distinctive in physical and cultural quality. For instance, the way we think of outer space as this almost sci-fi, fantastical frontier makes it so distinct from our more terrestrial environments. As such, that Star Wars kind of sound is able to stay contained within space. Composers typically won't score pastoral rolling hills out in the countryside with a John Williams-style military march. This self-contained kind of thing then encourages other composers to write things in that style, kind of snowballing and serving to further cement that centralized sound. Water music is another interesting case, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. It's mundane in its appearance pretty much everywhere on Earth. But since it's so intrinsic to the human experience, we're kind of able to use that shared understanding of how water works, feels, and moves, and what it means to us, that we can compose big generalizations of water's physical properties. But this generalization is also interesting because despite the vast amounts of water everywhere and the many different forms it can take, you would be hard-pressed to make a case for a distinction between lake, river, and ocean music. It all kind of just uses similar conventions. The problem with volcano music is that the primary physical quality of volcano is hot. There's just way too much overlap with other hot environments on Earth, like deserts, tropical rainforests, and my bedroom at 3 AM when I'm trying to sleep despite it already being January. But unlike those former two environments, people don't live in volcanoes, so most of the time we end up just borrowing the cultural flavors of hotter places that people actually live in, which ends up as an abstraction of an abstraction of an abstraction. In an earlier draft of the video, I was considering just lumping all of these environments together, but honestly, where's the fun in that? After thinking about it for a while, and researching way more songs than I usually do for these environment videos, I was able to come up with a lava sound that I feel is distinct enough. There are subcategories within, but our two big categories are simply cultural influences and physical properties. So starting with those cultural influences, I do find it interesting to see how the sheer variety contrasts with our cultural influences for ice music, our opposite of sorts. There are few places in the world that we would generally consider archetypally cold, compared to the hottest regions, which are both more populous and contain a greater volume of different types of music. For instance, we can sometimes hear Australian-influenced music, heard in Fire Island Volcano's usage of the didgeridoo. Or a kind of African influence viewed through the lens of Western pop sensibilities, such as in the volcano theme in Butters' favorite game Hello Kitty Island Adventure. The usage of mallet percussion, like the marimba in this tune, is a huge theme we'll see across all of these sweltering bangers, due to its frequent association with sub-Saharan Africa. But there's other hot places in the world that have music also defined by a wide variety of idiophones. Take a listen to Mario Kart Wii's Grumble Volcano. Some interesting influences. We have a marimba melody in the beginning, but then the Indian sitar takes over the melody. This melody is kind of in this composite Phrygian-ish space, intended to evoke the sound of scales from India and the Middle East. But there's also this kind of gamelan tonality thing going on in some places. In addition to an actual Balinese gamelan barely audible underneath all of this, intending to evoke an Indonesian sound as well. All of these places are archetypally hot, and it's definitely a common approach when it comes to scoring these volcano levels. Just throw everything in there. We'll see some other examples of that in a second, but I do want to briefly focus on maybe the most prominent single cultural influence on lava levels, Indian, specifically Hindustani classical music. Perhaps this distinction came about to separate lava and fire from the closely related desert environments, which tend to lean more towards Middle Eastern influences. And the best tune to demonstrate this is perhaps the most iconic lava level theme of all time. This tune is interesting. In some ways, it definitely evokes some conventions of the music of North India. It's primarily sitar with frenetic tabla samples underneath. That time-stretched lower notes of that opening bit emphasize our root and fifth, evocative of the tampura, which creates a drone by doing the same thing. Despite not having a clear meter, there is a discernible cycle in the tampura-ish sitar. The scale is interesting. We start in this kind of mixolydian space, notably hitting our natural second, F sharp, in this grace note, seeming to avoid the more expected Phrygian sound. But once that spooky voice comes in a bit later, we do end up actually hitting that flat 2 from Phrygian, while keeping the other notes of mixo. Interesting expression of composite Phrygian we actually don't see super often. That being said, the scale doesn't really resemble any specific Hindustani ragas. The pitch bends are seemingly arbitrary and don't line up with any conventional gamakas, the characteristic pitch bends that define a raga.
Sama ga ma ni da ni pa da ni sa.
Another elephant in the room is that Lethal Lava Land's theme is also used in Shifting Sandland, a desert level, kind of speaking to the overlap of volcano and desert music in video games. But I won't tear into Lethal Lava Land too much, it's a very serviceable theme. Personally, I do think the more interesting themes which lean into specific cultural styles are the ones that are either very authentic to the idiom or lean towards an unplaceable, eclectic fusion of a bunch of different things. But I'll save my thoughts about Orientalism and authenticity for my eventual desert video, which will probably just be a 30-minute deep dive into that single topic. Before I get too distracted, let's listen to a few other Indian-influenced video game themes that lean more fusion. Another Mario banger is Melty Molten Galaxy, or the much cooler Japanese title Hell Prominence. This one is fun. We have that typical sitar melody outlining our usual Phrygian dominant scale. I really like the bass though, it almost feels appropriately Afro-Cuban, almost feeling like Caravan or something. I think this fusion with more pop sensibilities and the tonality shift later into the more standard Mario Galaxy kind of sound helps us to feel really compelling as a more fantasy setting. This lava planet in a cartoonish solar system. It's funny to note that composer Mahito Yokota doesn't acknowledge any of the cultural influences in his notes on the soundtrack, instead pointing to the powerful floor tom as the most notable element in this tune. The deep, driving drums definitely deliver destruction and intensity befitting of the flame. Our final Indian-influenced tune is the much-requested Hot Top Volcano from Diddy Kong Racing. Much like the previous tunes, we feature Indian instruments like the tampura veena and tabla underneath our melody, which is played on xylophone in this kind of vocal chop. At the end of the section, we get the iconic vocal sample, rather rare to see in the music for an N64 game, pun intended. This, along with the other Indian samples, come from Spectrasonic's Heart of Asia CD, which in turn sampled the vocals from the Kannada language Jammu song. Composer David Wise also revealed that the Indian sound in this track in general was actually inspired by Lethal Lava Land, which was released in Mario 64 a year prior. But anyways, we haven't even talked about my favorite part of this track yet, the fusion. It's pretty much the blues. The melody pretty squarely outlines the blues scale. But on top of that, our form is pretty much the standard 12-bar blues form, with a focus on 1s and 4s in the first 8 measures, and 4 bars emphasizing the 5 chord to take us home. It's super fun, and a pretty wacky combo you don't really hear very often. Black American styles are another common influence we hear in lava levels. The American South from which jazz and blues originated is hot. We can extend that connection further and hear other genres that are derived from jazz and the blues. Funk, for instance, is a relatively common style we hear in these environments, such as in Wario Land Shake It's Mount Lava Lava. Interesting to think about brass as rather characteristically hot, almost in a boba kiki kind of way. Looking at the dichotomy with water music, for instance, we can hear a lot of soft, clear-sounding instruments in underwater bangers. Sine waves have a clean tone and mimic water's stillness and purity. But brass instruments, especially when played louder, have that overtone-heavy, shimmery quality that reflects fire's brash and energetic character. There's probably a reason why one of the most common descriptions for these loud and bold horn lines is burning. But quick tangent aside, going back to jazz and the blues, its purer melodic influence can be heard in things like Volcano Inferno from Mother 3. That organ is a pretty bluesy instrument in its own right, especially when the melody also has that blues scale flavor. A more abstract appearance of the blues can be heard in Final Fantasy XIV's Seven Flames. This tune is awesome. It's a simple melody, but it's so cool. Or hot, I guess. The melody is pretty much just the descending blues scale on sitar. Super fun and works so well in this theme for Pagelthon, a region that isn't physically awash in flame, but rather home to the Brotherhood of Ash, a clan of fire and ash-themed warriors. There is one more tune I wanted to talk about in this blues section, but after writing the script here, I felt it was more appropriate in the final section of the video. Spoiler, but it's my favorite fiery tune of all time, so please watch to the end or I'll be really sad. But anyways, the guitar we hear in Pagelthon works well for the same reason as the horns. The distortion gives it that same characteristic power and drive. We can hear a great example of this in a theme written by Toby Fox, an iconic theme he wrote in the 2010s for a hot land steeped in lava. A name you all know. It starts with an A! Atomic Empire from Homestuck. There is guitar, and it is distorted, and it does sound pretty spicy. Something I haven't really talked about yet is the relative dissonance and pull we hear in our fiery chord progressions. In most of our other natural environments, our chord progressions tended to lean more towards ambient and washy, kind of giving a more immersive and tranquil feel to places like the ocean, snow, and space. But fire and lava gives us this feeling of primal fear and danger. Dissonance and action are appropriate harmonic flavors for this kind of environment, which we can see in this driving chord progression. We have powerful resolutions back to our tonic chord, like the classic flat 6, flat 7, 1 resolution, and this wacky and crunchy 5 over flat 6, flat 7. Super fun. Thus far, we've pretty much only looked at volcanoes and lava lands, though, which are cool. But do you know what's not cool, Bobby? Hell. A further abstraction of scary lava music, a very common association with hell is that same electric guitar and metal influence. And what better song to demonstrate this than Doom's iconic At Doom's Gate? Metal and Hell is a match made in heaven. That emphasis on the flat 5 scale degree with this fast tempo and power in all of the instruments feels threatening and scores this ontologically evil concept in our minds perfectly. That intrinsic fear and wariness of fire informs our collective vision of hell, or any other non-denominational underworld. Perhaps the simplest and most natural way to imagine being tortured for eternity is being burned alive. Fire to us is a consuming, destructive force of nature, much like my metalhead friends when they slam 3 white monsters and go into the pit and do a big spin move. Okay, but what about songs that don't lean into specific genres and cultural influences for its heat? These tunes try to emulate the physical properties of fire, heat, or other associated things. One of the most common abstractions we consistently hear is a heavy focus on low, intense bass. Low sounds are simply scary and imposing. They sound big and threatening, working well to score fire and lava. We can hear a good example in Lava Landing from Kirby's Epic Yarn. The bat, we have this piano ostinato in the left hand, playing fast octaves in the lowest possible register. The sparse melody comes in with the right hand, soon evolving into chords. Something I find interesting is the usage of pedal point. The A holds in the bass for the majority of the section while the chords change over top, giving a strained and unsettling quality to the harmony. This further develops in the following section, where the pedal breaks and we get these chords that fall in constant structure. Though we start in a kind of stable A-Mixolydian-ish tonality, the following chords break us out of that tonality, with us only being able to hold onto the A in the bass. Then we lose that A, and we tumble down in free fall until we land on this D major. It's such an efficient way to make things feel like they're falling apart, an increasing sense of alarm and entropy as the heat accumulates in this active volcano. And it's cool to see that all of this is played on solo piano. The tune evokes this searing sound through pure harmony and register, and I think it's one of the best studies in efficiently capturing the feeling of a particular environment. But extreme heat doesn't have to be within the caldera. I really like what happens in Pokemon Omega Ruby's drought theme. This tune actually gave me nightmares as a kid. It just feels like danger in audio form. Those high staccato stabs on top outline these alarming diminished chords and create dissonant minor 9 intervals with that low, fat, grimy bass. A subtle effect I really like is that in the repeat there's this delay effect. To me it feels like heat-induced delirium, mirages, things melting and falling apart. Though fire technically isn't involved, it's spiritually a fire theme. Groudon created a supernatural, cataclysmic heat that is imminently threatening to turn the Pokemon world into a barren wasteland in mere minutes. We've seen low piano and bassy synth in our fire themes, but especially in bigger orchestral contexts, we can also hear a lot of low brass. A good example is in Cookie Run Kingdom's Avatar of Ruin theme. Much like Lava Landing, we have this E pedal held by the low brass. With those strings on top and the epic drums, it feels almost like some fantasy military march, which makes a lot of sense. As previously mentioned, we fear fire as this force of destruction. An evil, warlike sound is simply a personification of fire, an army or other dangerous entity that marches onwards and destroys everything in its path. While also not taking place in a literal fire or lava level, this is the boss fight theme for the eponymous Avatar of Ruin, a great blazing beast and the true form of burning spice cookie. But before I get too sidetracked with Cookie Run lore, I do want to talk about those chants we were hearing. It's another common element we hear in lava levels. It just sounds so big and primordial, much like a volcano or caverns of lava beneath the Earth's surface. Another tune that's been on my mind recently which uses this kind of sound is Silksong's Deep Docks theme. This section's pretty cool. The vocals build, getting a bit crunchier, but also wider in their voicings. There's a bunch of reverb as well, and so much of it is in the low end, giving this big, cavernous bass that kind of echoes through the gaps. This plays in the aforementioned deep docks, kind of a hybrid lava/forge kind of area. We can hear elements of that forge in those gaps between the vocals, where we have taikos accentuated by anvil hits. It's probably the most literal interpretation of fire music we've seen thus far, the sound of metal striking hot metal, which is a pretty common thing in these kinds of forge/foundry levels. Lowkey, my favorite tune in this kind of subgenre is the Chop Shop theme from the beloved 2005 cyberpunk animated masterpiece, Robots. But anyways, maybe even more so than other environments, we can hear sound effects used rather commonly to represent lava. Take for instance Lava is Hot from Baba Is You. It's a pretty simple composition with just the drums, fat, grungy bass like we saw in Pokemon Ruby, and that high viscosity bubbling of lava. Super effective and fits the minimalist style of Baba Is You. Another good example is in Donkey Kong Country 2's Hot Head Bop. Same kind of bubbling lava, but with that familiar, jazzy David Wise groove underneath. Even if the bubble effects were absent, I do still think that groovy bass helps to give enough energy to distance this from a more still, consonant environment. Which brings us to our final subcategory, made up of tunes which didn't squarely fit into any of the other categories, but were absolutely worth talking about. First, Redgar Forbidden Lands from Kirby. sonority in the beginning is crazy, a dissonant cluster played in horns and strings, setting the tone for this hostile endgame hellscape. Kind of a theme we'll see in some of the following tunes as well. It's so frenetic and eclectic, almost cycling through every type of fiery timbre we've seen thus far. After this brash horn stab, we have this throat singer hitting a low C, then an anvil-like hit in the chimes, and then low brass to take over the melody. The triplets in the strings kind of give that subtle militaristic feel we were talking about earlier, but then we have this low-key dubstep breakdown in the B section, followed shortly after by that low piano. It's all just so chaotic, but it works. Things are grounded by the simple and driving melody in that low brass, and overall paints such a vivid picture of this burning landscape. Another tune in this category that I absolutely adore is the lava theme from Spelunky 2. This tune grooves so unbelievably hard. The 16th swing at this tempo feels so good, and the bass line is so restrained, giving us those tasteful fills only at the end of the phrase. But of course also works so well as a volcano theme. The marimbas and tempura underneath give just a touch of flavors from their respective cultural associations. I like this tonality. It's kind of bluesy, kind of Phrygian, but that third note with the A flat and D flat almost feels a bit Locrian. It's such a tasteful and refreshing departure from the more obvious Phrygian dominant tonalities we typically find ourselves in, still giving us that spicy darkness while remaining culturally ambiguous. And on top of all of this, we have the lava bubble sound effects and this disgusting bass tone. It's glorpy, it's glooby like my boy Mr. Antenna. But on top of all of that, I love this tabla underneath, hitting this kind of pitch bend on the and of 3. It's such a clever choice for percussion. On top of the aforementioned cultural associations, it grooves so hard, fits the bouncy swinginess of the tune, and also the pitch bend resembles that deep, popping sound of bubbling lava. So awesome. For our penultimate tune, we have a fan favorite from Minecraft. A name you all know. It starts with an S. Steve's Lava Chicken from the Minecraft movie. Okay, no, just kidding. Pig Step by Lena Raine. Harmony is serious, classical, and functional, giving us a sense of resolution like we've heard in a few of our tunes, and the melody has a hint of bluesiness with those grace notes. That iconic bass riff is nasty, and so elegant in how it forms such a memorable motif despite its simplicity. But my favorite element of this tune is the bit crushing. The piano, some of the synthy elements, and drums have a form of distortion on them that puts this layer of crackliness in the high end. And to me, it sounds like the crackling of a bonfire, especially given the interspersed wooden stick percussion sounds. Super fun. But alright, we're finally at my favorite fire level theme, and honestly the entire reason why I made this video in the first place. Since 2023, I've had this entry in my video ideas document, so let's finally talk about it. So inspired. On paper, it looks like a mess, not a super clear tonality, random instruments, and unplaceable sound effects coming in every so often. This is the perfect theme for the Fire Temple in Tears of the Kingdom, though. It's a deconstruction of the blues, viewed through the impressionist lens of the rest of the soundtrack. We have this kind of Hammond organ, a super unexpected instrument that I feel like probably isn't heard anywhere else in the soundtrack. But of course it's idiomatic in the blues and adds that quality to our soundscape. It's subtle, just playing fifths that move down a half step, then up a third in measure 4. It's just barely there and non-intrusive, but this functionally gives us our deconstructed blues scale. Taking all of the notes in the 4-bar cycle, we get this. And it's not just the organ holding it down, we literally have a walking bass line. In some parts, it almost feels like a tone row, hitting long sequences of angular chromaticism that pull us out of our already flimsy D minor. Under all of this, we hear scattered fragments of ideas, a piano chord in the beginning, this haunting, muffled scream, and more familiar things in the genre like this trumpet stab and marimba arpeggio. All of this builds for almost a whole minute, finally culminating in the closest thing we have to a melody in the piano line. This is so cool. Without much warning, we get this fast bebop run upwards, which then gives us this simple melodic snippet. Certified motif heads will recognize this as a reference to the theme of Yunobo, the Sage of Fire in this game.
I am the Sage of Fire! I've got an awesome new power, Goro!
It's so tasteful, especially considering that's all we hear of the melody. We settle back into ambience and groove before any firm melody can take hold, which really serves to add to both the loneliness and unfamiliar danger of this inhospitable, infernal mineshaft. Maybe not the most sweltering tune we've seen today, but with how transformative and unique this track is, Tears of the Kingdom's Fire Temple theme is my favorite lava level theme of all time. But what do you guys think? As with all of these environment videos, there are so many tunes that I didn't get to talk about, so post your favorites in the comments. At the end of the day, these categories and conventions are arbitrary and non-mutually exclusive, but I hope you can use some of these ideas to write your own blazing bangers. If you liked this video, smash that subscribe button, hit that bell, and consider joining my wonderful Patreon supporters, without whom I would be unable to do this as much as I do. It looks like the guy from the beginning is back from hell and has a recording for me. Let's hear what hell sounds like. Oh, that's actually not bad.